The Faulkner twins, Tyrese and DeShawn, arrived at Jefferson Ridge High as outsiders, quiet, observant, and immediately marked as different. Their mother had moved them from the vibrant, unapologetic streets of Oakland to the subdued, almost stifling politeness of Spokane Valley in search of a fresh start. But fresh starts were never that simple. The moment they stepped into the school's fluorescent-lit hallways, they felt the weight of eyes on them, curious, wary, hostile. The whispers slithered between lockers like snakes, hissing words they pretended not to hear. They're from the hood. Why'd they come here? Bet they're trouble. Their mother, Alicia Faulkner, had hoped the move would shield them from a violence and systemic neglect that had claimed too many boys who looked like them. She had imagined wide-open spaces, safer streets, better opportunities. But Jefferson Ridge High wasn't a sanctuary. It was a battlefield in disguise. The students here didn't throw punches outright. They wielded exclusion like a weapon, their racism wrapped in thin smiles and backhanded compliments. Tyrese, the older twin by 7 minutes, was the more analytical of the two. He noticed the way teachers hesitated before calling on him, as if expecting defiance instead of an answer. He saw how the security guard lingered near them during lunch, fingers twitching near his radio. He heard the way Trevor Langley and his friends laughed a little too loud when they passed, their jokes laced with slurs they thought the twins couldn't decipher. DeShawn, though equally perceptive, burned with a quiet fury. He clenched his fist when a note fluttered out his locker, a crude drawing, a new sketch beside the words, "Go back where you came from." He wanted to react, to slam the offender against the lockers and make them regret it. But then he'd hear their father's voice, steady and firm. You don't fight for pride. You fight for peace, and only when it's the last option. Their father, Marcus Faulkner, had been a Marine before a knee injury forced him out of service. He had raised his sons on discipline and respect, and the harsh truth that the world would judge them before they even spoke. You gotta be smarter, sharper, stronger, he'd say, because they'll always expect you to fail. When the bullying started, Marcus didn't tell him to turn the other cheek. He took them to a dojo downtown, where a grizzled sensei named Hiroshi taught them to channel their anger into precision, their pain into power. Training became their refuge. The dojo was the one place where no one questioned their right to be there. The wooden floors absorbed their sweat, their frustration, their silent screams. They learned to strike not with blind rage, but with control. A punch wasn't just a punch. It was a statement. A block wasn't just defense. It was a refusal to break. But outside the dojo, the hostility only grew. Trevor Langley, the varsity football star with a smirk that made DeShawn's blood boil, was the ringleader. He'd accidentally bump into them in the halls, his shoulders slamming into Tyrese's with just enough force to be deniable. His friends would snicker, their laughter a chorus of approval. One day, as DeShawn opened his lunch, he found his sandwich smeared with toothpaste. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, all except for a quiet girl named Lian Nguyen, who met his eyes with something like shame before looking away. Tyrese had warned him, don't give them what they want. But how long could they endure this? How many slights? How many humiliations? Before even their father's lessons weren't enough. Then came the day Trevor cornered DeShawn after school, his usual smirk replaced with something darker. You think you're tough? He sneered, shoving him against the brick wall. You and your brother walk around like you're better than us. But we know what you really are. DeShawn's pulse roared in his ears. His fists trembled, not with fear, but with the effort of restraint. He could end this. One well-placed strike, and Trevor would crumple. But then what? Suspension? Expulsion? Another black mark on their record. Another reason for the world to say, see? We told you they were violent. So he swallowed the rage. He walked away. But that night, in the dojo, he attacked the punching bag like it held every injustice he'd ever suffered. Tyrese watched in silence before joining him, their synchronized movements a testament to their unspoken bond. They wouldn't break. Not yet. But they both knew peace had its limits, and theirs were running out. Everything changed when Trevor and his friends cornered them after school, thinking their silence meant weakness. The fight was swift and decisive, Tyrese dodging Trevor's punch, DeShawn flipping another boy to ground, all caught on video. The footage spread like wildfire, forcing the school to confront the racism it had ignored. Other students, emboldened by the twins' defiance, began sharing their own stories of harassment, leading to assemblies, diversity training, and a shift in the school's culture. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. Tyrese and DeShawn had been dealing with microaggressions and outright bullying for months. Comments whispered in hallways, books accidentally knocked out of their hands, teachers looking the other way when they were picked on in class. They had tried reporting it. Once, a guidance counselor had listened politely, offered a strained smile, and told them to try and keep the peace. That was the moment they knew they'd have to handle things differently. The twins had always relied on each other, born just 3 minutes apart. They shared not only a birthday, but a bond so deep it felt like they could read each other's minds. Where Tyrese was more reserved, always thinking before he spoke, DeShawn was quick to react, all fire and instincts. They balanced each other perfectly, and together, they had tried to keep their heads down, to not make waves. But the pressure had been building. Trevor had always been a problem. He came from a well-off family, the kind whose donations earned them a say in school policies. He wore privilege like armor, shielded by teachers who gave him second chances and classmates who followed his lead. When Trevor laughed at someone, others laughed too. When he picked a target, his friends joined in like clockwork. And now, that toxic energy had turned toward Tyrese and DeShawn. The confrontation had started the way these things usually do, a joke taken too far. Trevor had mocked DeShawn's hair in front of a crowd. When DeShawn didn't laugh, Trevor pushed harder, throwing in a racial slur like it was part of a punchline. A few kids laughed nervously. Tyrese stepped forward, telling Trevor to back off. That's when Trevor promised he'd catch them later. They didn't think much of it, until later came. After school, as the courtyard emptied and the sun dipped low, Trevor and two of his friends blocked the path home. Tyrese and DeShawn stood still, sensing the moment. Trevor made the first move, swinging wildly. Tyrese ducked instinctively, adrenaline kicking in. DeShawn didn't hesitate. He grabbed one of Trevor's friends and threw him down with practiced ease. Someone nearby pulled out a phone. The whole fight lasted less than 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds would change everything. By the time the principal had called him in the next day, the video had already gone viral among students. The twins weren't suspended. They were questioned. So was Trevor. But the footage made it hard to twist the truth. The narrative couldn't be spun. Too many people had seen what happened. The video showed not just a fight, but the power dynamic behind it. It exposed the taunts, the attempted intimidation, the way the twins had defended themselves. Not started anything, and it sparked something unexpected. At first, whispers filled the halls. Then came murmurs of support. And then a dam broke. Students of color began posting their own stories online, videos, anonymous screenshots, diary-style confessions. They talked about teachers ignoring slurs, classmates making them feel like outsiders, the subtle ways they were made to feel less than every single day. Some posts were heartbreaking. Others were furious. All of them shared one thing: truth. Soon, the administration couldn't ignore it. The principal held a school-wide assembly. At first, it was a typical PR script: apologies, promises, a panel being formed. But students weren't satisfied. They organized. They made signs. They staged a walkout during fourth period. News outlets picked up the story. And through it all, Tyrese and DeShawn became reluctant leaders of a growing movement. They didn't ask for it. In fact, the attention made Tyrese uncomfortable. He didn't like the spotlight. DeShawn, on the other hand, embraced the chance to speak up. He attended school board meetings with other students. He helped form the Diversity and Equity Student Coalition. Tyrese worked more behind the scenes, co-writing speeches, helping classmates frame their experiences into clear demands. Teachers began attending training sessions, real ones, not just box-checking seminars. Curriculum was revised to include more diverse voices. Students were encouraged to report bias, and more importantly, those reports were taken seriously. It wasn't perfect. Some students pushed back. A few parents complained about too much focus on race. But the movement held firm. Allies among the staff helped. A new vice principal, hired mid-year, brought experience in restorative justice, and immediately became a trusted adult for many students. For Tyrese and DeShawn, the shift was surreal. There were moments when it felt overwhelming. They were still teenagers, still navigating friendships, classes, and college applications. Sometimes DeShawn would stay up too late, reading news stories of racism from across the country, feeling the weight of it all. Sometimes Tyrese would shut down, withdrawing when the pressure got too much. But they leaned on each other. Always. Their parents, too, were proud but cautious. They had warned them from a young age about the world, about how they'd be seen. But they also supported them completely. Their father, a community organizer, reminded them to take care of their mental health. Their mother, a teacher herself, cried when she saw how many students were speaking up, some for the first time in their lives. Months passed. The school was changing, slowly but undeniably. The Diversity Coalition helped implement mentorship programs. Clubs began hosting cultural celebrations. A mural was painted in the main hallway, featuring student-designed artwork that celebrated unity, resistance, and hope. And Trevor? He was transferred to another school. His parents tried to frame it as a fresh start, but the truth was he had become a symbol, one the administration could no longer defend. His absence spoke volumes. In one of the final school assemblies that year, DeShawn gave a speech. It wasn't rehearsed. He spoke from the heart. "We didn't start a revolution," he said, voice steady. "We just stopped letting people walk all over us. And when we did, others stood up too. That's the power of truth. That's the power of standing together." The auditorium erupted in applause. Later, Tyrese added a post to the school's new equity board. "Our silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And now we speak." The movement didn't end with the school year. Students who graduated carried their voices to colleges, to social media, to community meetings. The twins were invited to speak at youth panels and conferences, and their story was included in a short documentary made by a group of student filmmakers. But perhaps the biggest change was this. Younger students, the ones in freshman year or middle school shadowing the high schoolers, no longer felt like they had to stay quiet. They saw what was possible when people stood up. They saw what courage looked like, not just in fist-throwing defense, but in words, in unity, in the refusal to shrink. Everything changed when Trevor cornered them, but everything grew because they fought back, and others followed by the end of the year. The twins were no longer just the quiet new kids. They were symbols of resilience. Their restraint and discipline had turned a moment of violence into a movement for change. As they stood together, their fathers' hand-stitched black belts around their waists, they understood the real fight wasn't in the parking lot that day. It was in proving that strength isn't about throwing the first punch, but standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. When Tyrese and DeShawn first walked to the halls of Oak Ridge High, the air shifted, not out of fear, but because they were different, not just because they were twins, or because they transferred in the middle of the year from a district far less affluent, or even because they walked with the kind of quiet confidence that unsettles people who rely on noise to prove their worth. It was because they carried with them a kind of calm that the chaos of the school wasn't ready for. Oak Ridge was a school divided in subtle ways. The lunchroom was a silent map of social boundaries. Athletes sat with athletes. Honor roll students clustered together. The drama kids formed their own expressive orbit, and the rest, well, they filled the spaces in between. But race, while never spoken aloud, carved its own invisible lines. The twins saw it immediately. They felt it when teachers watched them more closely than others. They felt it when classmates flinched at their presence in honors classes, surprised that kids like them knew the answers. They heard in the hushed tones of mock concern. They seemed nice, but I wonder what they're really like. For a while, Tyrese and DeShawn said nothing. They kept their heads down, focused on grades and training. Their father had taught them martial arts, not for sport, but for discipline. Every kata, every sparring session in the garage, was less about fighting and more about learning who they were. "You don't fight to win," he would say, tying their belts. "You fight to remember you can choose not to." That lesson would matter more than any of them could have known. The incident in the parking lot wasn't something they invited. It was the end of a slow burn, months of passive aggression, of slights wrapped in jokes, of being called urban with a smirk, of hearing you people in classrooms where they were supposed to feel safe. One afternoon, while walking home, a group of students followed them, hurling insults that echoed with the bitterness of generations. One of them, Trevor, threw the first punch. Cameras came out. People circled. The twins could have fought back, and for a second, it looked like they might, but they didn't. Instead, Tyrese stepped forward and blocked the second punch, not with his fists, but with calm. DeShawn held his ground, not moving, not flinching. "We're not doing this," Tyrese said, his voice steady. "You want to fight, you'll be fighting yourself." It was the pause that changed everything. Trevor stumbled back, unsure what to do with resistance that didn't fight back. The crowd was silent, and someone, no one remembers who, started clapping. Just one person, then another, and then the rest. Not because it was a show, but because in that moment, the school saw something they hadn't expected: power without violence, strength and restraint. The video went viral, not because of the attack, but because of the twins' response. News outlets picked it up. Teens show courage in face of hate. Real strength, choosing peace. Headlines painted them as heroes, but the twins were uncomfortable with that title. "We just didn't want to be what they expected," DeShawn said in an interview. "We weren't going to let their hate shape our actions." The days that followed weren't easy. The school administration held emergency meetings. Parents demanded answers. Some defended Trevor, calling it a misunderstanding, while others rallied behind the twins, pushing for accountability and equity. But the real shift happened with the students. Suddenly, conversations began happening in places they hadn't before. In classrooms, teachers started opening discussions about race, bias, and privilege. In the cafeteria, students who never crossed lines began sitting together, asking questions, listening. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was movement. The twins, once shadows in the hallway, became the pulse of a new culture, not because they wanted the spotlight, but because they earned it. They began mentoring younger students, helping launch a peer mediation group called the Break Line, a name that referenced both their martial arts and the invisible barriers they wanted to break in school. They spoke at assemblies, not with bravado, but with clarity. "You don't have to swing to hit back," Tyrese said during one. "Sometimes silence is the loudest way to speak." Their father, a quiet man who rarely left the house except for work and community meetings, watched in the back of the auditorium. That night, he brought out the belts. Black hand-stitched, worn with time and pride. They had trained for years to earn them, but he hadn't given them out. "You weren't ready before," he told them, tying the belts around their waists. "But now you know what real strength looks like." They wore those belts with pride, not as a display of power, but as a reminder of everything they had overcome. And people noticed. Teachers started integrating more diverse voices into their curriculum. A social justice club formed. Even Trevor, after weeks of suspension and counseling, approached them one day and apologized, not just for the fight, but for how he had judged them without ever knowing them. "Didn't expect to learn anything from you," he admitted, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. "But I did. You stood up without lifting a hand. I wouldn't have." The twins didn't forgive him immediately. Forgiveness, they believed, was a journey, not a transaction. But they thanked him for owning his words. That, too, was a kind of progress. By spring, the school felt different. The tension was still there in pockets, but it had lost its grip. A mural went up on the back wall of the gym, painted by the art students and approved by the principal after much lobbying. It showed two silhouettes back to back, standing firm as a storm swirled around them. Above it, in bold letters, "Stand tall." On the last day of school, a group of freshmen gave the twins a card. On the front, it read, "You made us feel seen." Inside were messages from dozens of students, notes of gratitude, admiration, and stories of how they had inspired others to speak up, to think twice, to not stay silent. The twins read the card in silence, their eyes scanning each handwritten line. Then Tyrese folded it carefully, placing it inside his backpack like a medal. "This," he said to DeShawn, "this is the real reward." They walked home that afternoon the way they always did, side by side, in sync, not talking much, but knowing exactly what the other was thinking. Not as new kids anymore, not as victims, but as leaders. as symbols, as young men who prove that character isn't shaped by what happens to you, but by how you respond. They didn't change the world that year, but they changed a school, a culture, a mindset, and maybe that was a first step, because when the world tries to knock you down, standing tall isn't just resistance, it's revolution. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share.